Welcome back to another Film Geek video. Today I am talking about 5 apocalyptic films. Now these movies might be pre-apocalypse, during the apocalypse, or post-apocalyptic, but they all have one thing in common. Society as we know it is falling apart everywhere around us. So I've just seen this increase in interest in the apocalyptic film genre. Earlier this year we had Civil War, which granted was the end of the United States as we know it, but we also had the return of the Planet of the Apes franchise, and most recently Furiosa, a Mad Max saga. So it just seems like people are interested in the world ending all over again, so I thought I would strike while the iron is hot and introduce 5 more apocalyptic films that you might be interested in. Now these films are not in any order whatsoever, these are just suggestions of movies in the genre of the world or society falling apart around us. So sit back, relax, and grab a big bowl of popcorn because we're talking about 5 apocalyptic films. So let's get this started with, well, the film that pretty much got the post-apocalyptic film genre started, 1975's A Boy and His Dog. A Boy and His Dog is written and directed by L.Q. Jones, and it's starring Don Johnson. In fact, this is Don Johnson's first lead Hollywood role. This movie tells the story of, well, a boy and his telepathic dog in a big nuclear wasteland. So basically there was a civilization, the entire world gets nuked, and we're all living in a one great big desert. Sound familiar? Well, that's because this movie also influenced Mad Max. That's right, this movie was a heavy influence on not just the original Mad Max, but a real heavy influence on the Road Warrior itself. It's also a big influence in the video game Fallout 3. In this film, there's also an underground society of weird survivors. That was something that was utilized in Fallout 3, along with dog meat. You guys remember your little dog buddy that runs around with you? Well, that's a direct reference to A Boy and His Dog. At the very beginning of the film, Don Johnson and Albert, as he's called by Blood the dog, they're having an encounter with some scavengers. During the encounter, Don Johnson gets upset with Blood and calls him dog meat. So there's your direct reference in Fallout 3, and yes, this is something the developers have confirmed. This movie is based off of a book of the same name that was written in 1969 by author Harlan Ellison. This film was also approved by Harlan Ellison, and he said that this is the best adaptation of the screen that you could possibly get for this movie. Now, this movie is considered a dark comedy, and yeah, there's some actual laugh out loud moments in this movie, even though a lot of the stuff that's being depicted is very, very horrible and gross and just vile, but for some reason it keeps this weird upbeat attitude throughout the entire time of this film. Now, this movie's not long either, it just runs in at an hour and a half. It has a really good, amazing pacing, and it almost feels like 2 movies in one. Because the first part of the movie all takes place on the upper levels of the world in the desert, and we get to see what the wastelands look like. And then at about the halfway mark, we are taken underground to the weird fascist dictatorship society of strange people that put white face paint on and then cherry up their cheeks with red. They live in this weird like 1940s, 50s kind of underground society, which does sound familiar in the Fallout 3 world, don't it? Now, there was a plan for a sequel to this movie titled A Girl and Her Dog, where blood is found by a woman after it's presumed Albert is killed. Unfortunately, the film wasn't able to be made because Tiger, the dog that played Blood in the first film, passed away before production could begin. So if you're curious to check out the film that started the Mad Max franchise and heavily influenced Fallout 3, you can currently check out this movie on Tubi and Pluto TV. Moving on to our second film on the list, we have 1997's The Postman. Okay, stop screaming at me. I know it has a 14% on Rotten Tomato. I know this was a horribly reviewed film, but god damn it, for some freaking reason, I love this goddamn movie. Now look, I will be the first to admit that this is far from a perfect film. Hell, I will not even call this movie a hidden gem. This is something that I just really enjoy, and it really was the movie that started this channel. At first, I wanted to make this channel a movie redemption channel, where I took a film and tried to redeem it in the public eye. And this movie was going to be my first film. And when I sat down and tried to write it, I I had way too many bad sides to this movie than good sides, and that's when I realized that this is just a guilty pleasure for me. And I honestly think that if you were a fan of the apocalyptic film genre, this is something you're going to enjoy because it has all the right things. It has that goofy dialogue, it has strange and weird civilizations, it has some very well fleshed out character design, very well done sets, it has an extremely well made setting, and it looks like a very well developed world that's been lived in. It looks like it's harsh and dirty and grimy. It's not something that you would really see in a film today. Now, the first thing I am going to say about this movie that really holds it back from being a classic is its runtime. This movie clocks in at 3 hours long. I am not kidding you. This film is 3 hours. It lingers forever in certain scenes, and it really doesn't have to. This movie feels like a director's cut. Like, in order for a studio to get this movie made, they were like, okay, Kevin Costner, listen up. We'll let you have your big 3 hour long director's cut on the DVD, okay? But you gotta release at least a 2 hour film in theaters. I don't understand why someone didn't do this. There's so much crap, there's so much filler in this movie that if you just cut it out, slim this movie down to 2 hours, hell, an hour and 45 minutes, you would have a really fun kind of film. You would have something that had a very good pacing with a good narrative, with characters you can get behind, and a story that seems goofy, but when it finally kind of fleshes out and explains itself a little bit, it makes a lot of damn sense. So here's the story, alright? As I've been sitting here giving you all the reasons why it sucks, let's give you reasons why it's good. So the story is based on someone played by Kevin Costner, the Postman. And this guy is just a con man, basically. He's a survivor. He's by himself. He travels around the countryside. He makes money off of, like, basically going into towns and putting on, like, a show. He just does some Shakespeare with himself and his mule, and then they get money for just entertaining people, alright? During his journeys, he gets captured by this weird military militia that's kind of like, you know, Western outlaw type people, and that's what this film kind of is. It's like a post-apocalyptic Western. Kevin Costner's character is captured by these guys, he's taken to their camp, he's forced into their, to join their military, he escapes. When he escapes and he's hiding from them, he takes refuge in an old postman's van. When he's in there, he finds the uniform and a bunch of old letters, and he gets this idea, I can actually probably go get free food and stuff if I go around telling people that the United States government is back and I'm their postman. But then it turns into this whole idea that in order for civilization to grow, we need open communication within different settlements. So this whole thing turns into something actually cool and have a point to it from a really, really goofy place. And I think that the film doesn't lean into its silly and goofiness enough, but it's there. It is there. It's just that the film doesn't acknowledge it. It tries to play it straight. And I'm not saying this movie should have been a comedy by any means, but if they would have made it like a Western version of a Mad Max film, I really think this movie would have been a freaking classic. Now, this film does have a lot of good things going for it once you get past a lot of the long, drawn-out BS that you don't need to see, and a half hour of the film is just devoted to watching him heal. I mean, the whole thing really could have been summed up in a 2-minute long montage of just showing him sitting around eating soup in front of a fire or something. We would have got the idea, oh, he's healing from a bullet wound. So that's the kind of crap that I'm talking about that really drags this film down. It's really bloated and overdone. If somebody went into this movie and just cut, you really would have a really fun film on your hands. There's a lot of good stuff here. There's great cinematography. Unlike a lot of post-apocalyptic films, this isn't in a desert. It's actually in a lot of lush forests. There's a really good, very great looks all over this film, and Kevin Costner does take advantage of all of the shots of the wilderness. And there's also an extremely strange cameo near the end of the film that just comes out of nowhere, and it really just kind of makes you go, I'm on board, but that's fucking weird. So all in all, guys, I'm not trying to tell you that this is a great movie by any means. It's kind of a fail as a movie goes. But if you're someone who's just curious about post-apocalyptic films, there are things here that you're going to find enjoyable. So you might be able to find it out there for rent right now on Prime or YouTube. Hell, check this out. I still have my old Snapcase copy of this freaking movie right here. Not kidding. Look at that. So you can find it on physical media. I think there's a Blu-ray out there, but who knows, honestly. But yeah, 1997's The Postman, written, directed, well, I don't know if it was written, but it was definitely directed and starring Kevin Costner. Next up, we're changing mediums, and we're going into animation with a little sci-fi gem by the name of Nine. Nine was released in 2009 and is directed by Shane Ackler, and it's starring one hell of a cast. Elijah Wood, Jennifer Connelly, Crispin Glover, Christopher Plummer, Martin Landau, and John C. Reilly. This film is something I love talking about. Now, I have done a previous video on this, so I'm not going to go into a lot of details about this. So if you want to check that out, look it up on my channel. Yes, I have done a spotlight on Nine. Nine tells the story of a ragdoll that wakes up in a post-apocalyptic world, and he may be the key to humanity's salvation. The animation in this film is outstanding. I love the look of the ragdolls. They have this really cool steampunk element to them. The world itself has a really cool robotic steampunk look that I really like. My biggest complaint is the color palette of this film. It looks like a Xbox 360 game. Yeah, it is grays on grays on grays on brown. And unfortunately, at some points, our characters can get lost in the background, and so you kind of have to squint a little bit. Now, each one of them have a very unique character design, which I like. It gives their character a bit of personality and has them stand out. But unfortunately, the color palette is just so muddled. Sometimes even those unique designed characters will just get lost in that muddy, muddy background. The world building in this film is also outstanding. I really wish that we got to spend more time in this film. The movie is short. It just clocks in at about an hour and 20 minutes. And I really wish we could have spent more time there. The way the world building goes is kind of like mystery. You know, you learn about the world as the ragdolls do. It all goes through lore and legend. There's this really cool element of mysticism tied into it. Even though it all kind of ties into technology, it almost feels like magic, at least to the ragdolls, because they don't understand what's going on. They just know that they're pieces to something that's much bigger than themselves. There's this crazy evil machine that awakens that destroyed all of the human beings. And so now that it's awake, it's going after the little ragdoll guys. And the ragdolls may have some way of being able to save humanity, so the machines are trying to kill them. It's a very dark story, and this movie is PG-13, and let's just say that it earns its PG-13 rating, not because it's overly violent, it's just because it's a very involved story that I don't feel kids under the age of 13 would necessarily understand or respond to. This isn't a happy, bright, and colorful film. It has a lot of great elements, and I guess you could say it has a happy ending, but I do not say this is something that's for small children. Movies like this are kind of rare. You don't find things like it. Normally when it comes to animated films, they're made for adult only or for kids. And so this one fell into a kind of a middle area, and I think it really confused a lot of people when it came out, and not a lot of folks went out and saw this film, which is an absolute shame because seeing it on the big screen really brought the characters and this film a lot more to life. Like I said, the animation might be dark and all, but the textures in this film are outstanding, especially for a movie that came out in 2009. It looks really, really well done. Character designs, textures, and all, and the story itself, while it feels a little undercooked, is very fun and involved, and you really get a good sense of this world, but unfortunately you just don't get to spend enough time in it. Up next is another film that, yes, I have done a spotlight on already, but I really enjoy this movie, so it's making the list. 2011's Priest. Priest is directed by Scott Stewart, and it's starring Paul Bettany and Carl Urban. It tells the story of a group of priests that are these super killing machines that take out mutant vampire creatures. They're not really vampires, they're just these creatures that have taken over the world, and the only things that can stop these things are people known as priests that are a special group of warriors that were started by the church, and they go out slaughtering all of them. When it seems like they win the war against these things and put them on their own special reservations where nobody can bother them and they don't bother anybody else, all the priests were retired. So now Paul Bettany, who is a priest, is just kind of trying to make a life for himself, and he finds out that his niece has been kidnapped by a bunch of vampires, and he wants to go after those vampires. Well, the church says no. And this priest says, F you, I'm going after my niece. And so he goes after him. And what does he find? A super vampire played by Carl Urban, who's really bad, and he does bad things. Okay, guys, this movie isn't like all that deep. This is just a super fun, post-apocalyptic horror action movie with some pretty okay special effects, some really, really fun fight sequences, and just a popcorn fluff type of thing. The CGI in this movie, it's not half bad. It doesn't look great, but remember, it's 2011. The creature design isn't half bad. I like the look of the vampires, as they're called, but Carl Urban is the vampire leader. Unfortunately, I feel like his character was a little undercooked. I wish we would have gotten a little bit more of him, because he's just like, I'm evil and I'm gonna stop the priest because I'm bad. And that's about it. And you got Carl Urban here, and this guy can play mean and evil, and I really wanted to see it in this film. But that aside, this is just an absolute fun, post-apocalyptic, silly movie about super powered priest killing vampires. So honestly, what's not to like? Now, this movie does not hold your hand whatsoever when it comes to world building. It does give you a little bit of an explanation on the priest and this world and how the world ended and such in a really cool animated sequence at the beginning of the film. And then you just kind of learn how things work as the movie progresses. And I like that in a film. I don't need a bunch of exposition. All I want to see is a priest dude get in there and start blowing shit up and cutting off heads. Now, here's something you need to know, guys. This movie was nerfed upon release. It was supposed to have an R rating, but the studio thought, we might get more butts in seats if we nerf this sucker down to a PG-13 level. It didn't mess with the story whatsoever. They just cut out a lot of the blood and guts and gave it a much more kiddie kind of rating. But don't worry, there is an unrated version out there. Here's the thing. If you own the DVD version of this film, more than likely you have the PG-13. Now, if you have the Blu-ray, more than likely you have the uncut R-rated edition. So if you want this film with all its blood and guts gory, then blood and guts glory, let's try that again, then you need to get yourself the Blu-ray. If you can't find a physical media copy of this film, don't worry, you can find it for rent right now on Amazon Prime and YouTube. That brings us to our final film on the list, and of course I'm gonna end it on a 1980s campy classic, 1984's Night of the Comet. Night of the Comet is written and directed by Tom Eberhardt, and it's starring Catherine Mary Stewart and Kelly Maroney. Night of the Comet tells the story of two sisters who survive an apocalyptic event. A few days before Christmas, a comet is going to fly across Earth's sky, and it's supposed to be a really fun lights display, but little do the humans know that it's actually going to be an earth-shattering event, because anyone standing outside gets hit by the heavy radiation and is immediately turned to dust. Those who are indoors suffer a much slower dehydration death, but people who are behind steel survive the entire thing and are just plain okay. And that's our two sisters. Okay, guys, so this movie is just a fun 80s cult film. I remember I came across this movie, I think I was in my early teens, watching USA Up All Night. And this was one of the feature films, and I fell in absolute love with this movie. Is it perfect? No. Is it got amazing acting? No. It's a goofy 80s film that is just an absolute blast to watch. This film has all of the great 80s subjects: shopping, boys, and of course, the end of the world. Needless to say, a film like this was made on a shoestring budget, and a lot of the shots of the city being completely empty were filmed bright and early in the morning on regular business days in downtown LA. Basically, the film crew got down there as early as they humanly could and would film shots while people were sitting at stoplights. They would just let people move on, they would film an empty street, and then wait, and do it again, until they could get as many shots of the city being empty, even though it wasn't. But it appeared to be empty, and it saved them a ton of money so they didn't have to pay to shut down streets in the city. In order to add a little authenticity and fun to the film, the director talked to local teenagers and asked them questions like, what would be the first thing you would do if everybody in the world disappeared one night? What friends would you wish were still around? What things would, what would you follow? Blah, blah, blah. So basically, these are the events that teenagers in the 80s would do if the world ended. And guess what they did? They went right to the mall and went shopping. This film has one of my favorite post-apocalyptic shopping spree montages ever filmed. I think it's the only post-apocalyptic shopping spree montage from the 80s ever filmed too, but that doesn't stop it from being my favorite. So if you're looking for a post-apocalyptic film that tackles such big topics as secret organizations that live underground, what great radio station is playing the local hits, where to find the best deals at the local shopping malls, and of course, the leaderboard on the game of Tempest, then this is definitely the movie for you, and you can find it streaming right now on Tubi and Pluto TV. So there you have it, folks. 5 apocalyptic films that might be worth a watch if you're enjoying the genre. So thanks again for checking out the Film Geek, guys. If you liked what you saw here today, go ahead and subscribe to the channel, ring that bell for notifications, and give me the old thumbs up so I know you like what you're seeing. And if there's one more thing you can do, folks, that is keep watching movies. You know I'm gonna.